Good morning, Shelter fam. This is Sam bringing you the morning announcements, and this is what we got going on.
Easter's upon us, and we've got so much excitement around here at the shelter. To begin with, we have our Good Friday dinner, which starts at 6 p.m. April 19th. We're asking that you bring your favorite meat dish in a crock pot that serves 6 people. We at the shelter will provide 2 side dishes, a beverage, and dessert. We hope you get here early because this place fills quickly. At that time, we'll have testimony and special music. Lastly, we have our Easter egg hunt for ages 2 to 6 that will be held at the park 2 blocks north of us on the east side of the street. Oh, and don't forget to bring your crock pots. On Friday, the church will be open at 7:30 a.m. to receive those crock pots. We'll keep your food hot all day.
Hey everybody, Pastor Justin here, reminding you that we are going down to the orphanage on May 3rd through the 5th. This is going to be a working trip, so we need a bunch of cowpoke to come on out. You know how I tell my sons, working makes happiness, or something like that. Anyway, I thought it would be fun to offer up something, because I love offer up and going out and getting other people's garbage. So I thought, hey, I'll offer new people an opportunity to come out to Mexico. If 5 people come that haven't gone before, I'll wear a cowboy poncho on the first Sunday that the Redskins play football. Yay! So, can I get an amen to that? Thanks, Pastor Lenny. I appreciate it. Anyway, see Jonathan and Tricia to sign up. Thank you.
Don't forget about the ISI meeting on Wednesday at 7 a.m. and the Women's Bible Study Thursday at 10 a.m.
All right, would you give those announcements a big hand? Actually, don't, because that was too much creative liberty there. A puppet that's supposed to be me. I don't think so. How's everybody doing today? Come on, how's everybody doing today? I want to say a couple other announcements. First, I want to say a happy birthday to Miss Esther Sivak in the front row here. Yes, had to do that. A couple things just to add to that puppetry. Wonderful, Jonathan. And revenge is going to be terrible on that one. Yeah, a couple things is those that do have children today on the way out, or mom will be giving, or Nikki will be giving just the Easter eggs to fill up with candy to bring back so that we can go and plant those for the kids' hunt after service next Sunday. Next Sunday's Easter. How many can believe it's already April, like in almost end of April? We've had some good weather too, yeah? So this next coming week is so huge. We did it there. Mom was falling out of a tree. If you didn't notice, I thought that tree was coming down in that video. I was scared for that. But Friday is a big day. We will have over 100 people in the building. We will have all the tables. We'll have the side fixings ready to go. Your responsibility is to bring a crock pot anytime after 8 o'clock on Friday. The church will be open. Please make sure that you get here early for it. Though in the evening, and it's just a great night of fun and testimony. I know Kim is going to be singing that night as well. So it's just it'll be a great night to come out this Friday. And then of course, next Sunday, we have our Easter service, and we're going to be calling our Easter service Escape the Tomb. Escape the Tomb. How many of you have ever done an escape the room type thing before? Anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah. How many of you regretted doing that right as soon as you started it? I did. Anyway, okay. Anyway, we're going to do Escape the Tomb, though, this coming Sunday. And then we are going to have, I believe, 6 baptisms on Sunday, right? In the horse trough over here. So we have 6 people that have given their life over to the Lord, committed to Him. And so that's a big thing for us next coming Sunday. Just a couple other things. Kim, where are you? Kim, Where's Kim? Kim, stand up real quick. Kim, at the end of service today, she went to Goodwill and she went and purchased a bunch of 4x6s or 5x7 frames. If you're a member of this church, if you call this your home, we want to kind of update our wall. I was looking at our wall there, and I was about 20 pounds lighter in some of those pictures, and I don't even think Lincoln's up there. So we've had some pictures up there. We've been open for 8 years. So if you call this your home, Kim is going to give you a frame. If you have a picture of yourself, your family, something that's kind of candid, if you would bring that back, we'd love to put you up on the wall. It doesn't mean we're going to call you each week. Doesn't mean that you have any obligation. It's just this, that you're part of the family. How many of you are glad you're part of a church family? Right. So that's simply what that is. And so remember that. I'm going to go ahead and dismiss our kids right now. Would you give our kids a big hand as they go? I feel like I'm forgetting stuff. There's a lot of great things happening at the church. Wednesday nights, we have, of course, our college ministry that's happening. And then we have a group that we're calling, Gabe, can I say the name? We're calling it Cleaned Up. I love the name. How many of you know Gabe over there? Gabe, right there. He's a good man. And Gabe's leading a group with a group of really, really on fire guys at 7-ish on 6:30. Very casual on Wednesday nights. Of course, we have ISI led by Tom and Chad Salisbury and DeCoven and Dad and Brad and a bunch of guys here on Wednesday, every other Wednesday. So a lot of great things going on. And I'm just really, really proud of the ministry happening at the church. I'm going to bring up Justin right now. Justin's going to be in the pulpit today. Not much. We have two awesome interns here. Kim is one of them. Man, her voice is awesome. I love listening to Kim. She's anointed. Justin's somewhat anointed. He's average. He's getting there. But I'm blessed. I'm blessed. I was telling Kristen, I'm about to turn 40 next year, which to me is kind of like, wow, it's scary for me. And I'm thinking to myself, hey, I really need to invest. We need to really spend time investing in the future for future leaders of the church. And I'm grateful to all of you that do that on a consistent basis. We have a group of people in our church in their early 20s that love the Lord passionately. And that's really rare. If you've been around to a lot of different places, and that's not a critique, but we have a lot of on fire 20-year-olds, and I love that. And so I'm so grateful for someone like Kim, for Justin. So, we got amazing musicians. I'm just grateful to pour into them. So I'm hoping you're going to rock and roll today. How are you feeling? You feeling good?
I'm getting there.
You're nervous?
I'm as good as I'm going to get at this point.
That's
right?
true.
Right? I don't think there's any more time to prepare.
No, there isn't. Yeah. He's going to be preaching a message today. Faith is greater than fear. And we've worked on this a little bit over the last few weeks, and I'm very excited. I'm going to go ahead and take up the offering now as he gets started. If you brought your offering today, what you bring into the Lord, if you would, just please, the guys are going to take that up right now. A lot of you do that online. I want to welcome those that are watching online. I know there's people in South Phoenix, and there's people in Florida and Georgia and North Carolina, South Carolina, Iowa, up in northern Arizona. We welcome you. We're glad that you're participating in the shelter online. Of course, any of those that are in Phoenix, we would love to see you on Easter. One last thing on Easter, make sure that you get here early. It's super important for you to get here early, and the reason why is because it will have a packed house. We're going to put another 30 chairs in the house on Easter service, so please make sure that you're here early for that. I'm going to give it over to this young man. I'm going to tell you I'm very proud of you. And I'm just grateful for that you're persevering through some of the things that you're consistently being challenged with. And a few weeks ago, we really, really challenged him, right? It was I like to call a come to Jesus meeting. And what I love about this young man is that he's welcoming criticism, right? He's welcoming his foundation being moved. Not trying to brag on him, but how many of you, when we were listening to that song, the song says, I will build my life upon your love. It's a firm foundation. What really made a realization to me is that a foundation is never seen unless there's something wrong with it. So there's a lot of time put on above ground. what is seen and what people can glorify. And so I'm grateful for a young man like this that has really invited critique, and he's invited to work on his foundation, because he already has natural giftings. He already has those things, but we're constantly working on that. I'm proud of you, and I love you very much. Will you give Justin a big hand?
Thank you. Is this thing on? Are we good? Yes. Good morning, everybody. Morning. Yeah, thank you, Pastor Justin, for saying that. Actually, as Justin said, I've been doing this for a little bit now. I think I'm a little over 2 years at this point in this internship, and I just wanted to start the morning off by thanking all of you as a congregation, all of you for your support, for laying into that foundation that Justin was talking about. Truth be told, I think a lot of you have been here for a lot of that process, and it's been long and painful in some areas. I've missed the mark quite a few times, and the grace and just amazing love that this congregation has shown me is incredibly humbling. I mean, it's an absolutely terrifyingly humbling. And I know I don't always deserve that. Like Justin said, we've been working on this sermon a few weeks, or variations of the sermon and other sermons, and had to start over a couple of times. And through that, I had God bring me a song to my heart. And as a worship leader, I think that's something that where I connect with God so much more in a level of music and worship. Not everybody is that way. Some people are, some people aren't. But for me, that's where I find my true connection point. And God brought this song, No Longer Slaves. And I think we've done it quite a few times in this church. And it's this song talking about how we are not slaves to fear anymore. You know, God has set us free from that we are his children, and he has set us completely free from that. And it got me really thinking back, as Pastor Justin recently did a sermon series called Spirit-Led. We've been talking about being led by the Spirit and what that means. And the question he posed us with at the very beginning of that sermon series was, if the Holy Spirit were to disappear for a month, how would it affect your life? If you were to go a whole month without the presence of the Holy Spirit, how would that affect your life? And I think looking at that on a real level, it would change a lot, right? I think it would change an absolute ton. If I want to seek God's will in my life, I have to let his Spirit lead me, right? I can't find that path on my own. Romans 8:14, if you want to open up your Bibles there. I don't know if we have it up yet. Perfect. It says, for those who are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. As I'm talking about this song today a little bit and kind of breaking some of it down scripturally, the words child of God are very, very prominent within that. So being led by the Spirit and finding those paths, keeping our paths straight within him, we are his children. We're following him. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later and what it means to be a child of God. But as I got to thinking over and planning out this sermon, I realized, in my belief, the largest hindrance of being led by the Spirit of God is fear. I think there are a lot of us can say that we, make decisions out of fear. JJ spoke with me this morning, actually gave me a cool revelation. He says, I look around a lot, and I see about 90% of the people that I look at are making decisions out of fear, are reacting out of fear, instead of being intentional and allowing the Spirit to lead them. And I think that's a huge hindrance to us. And I wanted to open up this particular sermon with a very familiar verse to all of us out of 2 Timothy. It says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear. A spirit of fear, he has not given that to us, but of power, love, and a sound mind. I think that we have to understand that God didn't give that to us. We know scripturally, we know from his word, right, that we've been set free. Everybody know that here? We've been set free from that yoke of slavery to fear. Galatians 5, verse 1 says, it was for freedom that Christ set us free. That he set us free. I didn't set anybody free. Christ set us free. Therefore, keep standing firm and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. All right? And I want to think about that mentality for a little bit, what that means to be subject to a yoke of slavery. When I think about what's behind that, I actually like to look to the Israelites as they were escaping Egypt. Right? God provided them a path. They were set free from their slavery. And throughout all of it, you look back and you see multiple times in the scripture that they multiple times said they wanted to go back. And how crazy is that? You've lived a life of being tortured, being punished, being absolutely just demolished by people who are your masters. And then God sets you free from that. and you go forward. But because they were afraid of the path that was in front of them, they wanted to go back. I want to talk about that for a little bit because they refused to walk in faith. Time and time again, the word tells us that God proved the Israelites that he would take care of them. Over and over again, we see that, right? God performed many miracles to save them. And, you can go way back in and look at just the miracles that he did with Moses leading up to setting them free. But then afterwards, we see more and more. He provided them a way out of Egypt. He protected them in a way that they didn't need fear. If we look at Exodus chapter 13, verse 21, it says, "By day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people." Isn't that ultimate protection right there? Like, to think, that would be pretty cool for me if I was like trying to follow God's path and he had this crazy, awesome miracle going on where I know, hey, I don't have to fear. I don't have to be afraid right now because I'm totally protected. But that's not what the Israelites do. And we see, later on in chapter 14, God has Moses part the Red Sea, another miracle, providing safe passage for the Israelites. And then he destroys the Egyptian army that's chasing them, yet another miracle to provide protection for them so they didn't have to fear, right? And then yet they still complained. They still complained about not having water to drink, so God had to make bitter water sweet using a tree, using a branch. And then later on, he even makes water flow from a rock. And if that isn't a clear sign that God's going to provide for us, I don't know. Surrounded by their fear, and yet they still complained. So they complained about being hungry after that. So God provides manna, and he provides quail for meat. And keep in mind, this is a nation of millions of people that God is bringing magical bread down to provide food for every single day, giving them enough. Yet they still complain. They still did. And that seems, for me, I look at our culture, I look at our society around us, and I see we do the exact same thing, right? See, God provides for us over and over again, yet we still complain. We want more. We're still afraid. We still complain. And he yet continues to provide for us. We don't trust in him. See, over and over again, God proved to the Israelites that he would provide for them, yet over and over again, they complained and even wanted to return back to slavery. And it's interesting to me how much fear and complaining and being unhappy in that are knit together. They tie in very, very closely, I believe. Our fears, they cause us to complain or grumble. In Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 1 through 3, it says, "Then the whole congregation lifted up their voices and cried out. And that night the people wept. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And the whole congregation said to them, 'If only we had died in the land of Egypt.'" Think about that. They've been brought into salvation. They've been promised a land that's flowing with milk and honey, a land where they can be safe. And they said, if only we had died in Egypt in our captivity. Or if we had died in this wilderness. And they asked this crazy question, why is the Lord bringing us to this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will become plunder. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And the chapter actually goes on to them saying that they are going to appoint a leader and go back. And God deals with that and actually punishes some of these people in the way they're grumbling, and it, again, proves that he will protect his people. The Israelites, they were so fearful of what laid ahead that they thought it would be better to go back to being slaves, even though God promised to deliver them to a promised land. Their fear made them complain. I think we find that a lot in our society today. It made them search for comfort in what they knew, even though what they knew was horrible. My big point I'm leading up to here is that I believe fear stops us from walking in faith, stops us from living in the Spirit. See, we refuse to take steps out in faith because of fear, right? We stray away from God's path because of fear. We refuse to be led by the Spirit because of fear. Our fears cause us to question God as the Israelites did, and to question our paths. And I know personally I've done this a lot of times in my own ministry, where I have been so fearful of failing at something, and that's a huge fear of mine, that I avoided it at all costs, that I wanted to not accept any responsibility of that thing. So I wouldn't take it on because I was afraid of failure. But if God had that in my path, that's something that he wanted me to do, and I ran away from it. I think that fears, when we act in them, never cause anything good. So I ask myself sometimes, okay, how do I change that behavior? How do I stop doing that, this mentality? How do I overcome the fear and allow the Spirit to lead me? How do we do that? How do we overcome our fear? And the simple answer I came to in the research I've been doing is that we can't. We can't overcome our fears. Faith overcomes fear. That's why I'm calling this faith is greater than fear, because we don't do it at all. God overcomes our fears. Faith overcomes our fears. We have to trust in God and recognize that he has set us free from fear by his grace, that we are no longer slaves to that fear. In Galatians 4, verse 7, it says, therefore, you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God. His grace set us free, not anything else. I want to think about that. We are no longer a slave, but a son. The song also says that we are the sons and daughters of God. It talks about that a lot in this song, No Longer Slaves, that we are his children. And I want us to take a moment to think about, what does it mean to be a child of God? Children, I've been thinking on, are some of the most fascinating creatures on this planet. And it kind of blows my mind, because kids walk around with blind faith and blind trust until the world proves otherwise. And ideally, that's how we should be in our faith, right? That's a big ask, by the way. Because ideally, yeah, we're supposed to walk around with blind faith. And what does that mean? Okay, you look at children who rely totally and completely on their parents. So we should be relying totally and completely on God. Look at children who trust and believe what others tell them without question. That's how we're supposed to be with God. For me, that's a really, really big ask, because unlike children, the world has shown me differently. And I've fallen to that multiple times, where I don't have that blind faith. I don't have the ability to just say, okay, I trust, and I should. And really, I do have that potential for that if I just lean into the Lord. But yet, I'm looking at the world and living in the world. I don't have the unquestioning faith all the time. I try to. But what it means is having a need to not understand and to just trust in God. The problem really, truthfully, comes from within, right? See, I try to conquer my fears myself. Again, we don't overcome those fears. Faith does. And fear, as I've been doing in preparing for the sermon, is actually a really interesting thing to research. Because what we fear today is so differently from what people have feared in past generations, and even the last 100 years, and even before that and before that. You know, I'm not afraid of being attacked by some wild animal and having to fend it off with a spear, right? I'm not afraid of being stoned for sharing my beliefs. There's still people today that are. There were people way in our past. I was doing some research, and according to CNBC, this is a list of the top 10 fears that hold you back from being successful. I think every single one of these fears directly corresponds to holding us back from being Spirit-led. First is the fear of inadequacy. I think it's a big one for me personally, not being good enough, right? Second is the fear of uncertainty, not knowing what lies ahead of you. The fear of failure. I talked about that one already. And it causes you to avoid it altogether. The fear of rejection. I think everybody goes through some rejection at some point in their life, right? The fear of missing out. Thank you, Trisha, for that fun look. Gotcha. The fear of change. The fear of losing control. I was going to write a joke about Pastor Justin on that one, actually. And he's throwing things at me. And now I was going to give you a compliment, man. I was going to write a joke on Pastor Justin, and he's actually been really wonderful about releasing control lately. So, yeah, thanks for throwing that pen, though. The fear of being judged. Hi, millennials, my fellow millennials out there. This is a pretty big one for us, right? We all care about what the world thinks about us. The fear of something bad happening. I think everybody goes through that at some point, and you even turn into paranoia sometimes. The fear of getting hurt. All of these are incredibly common fears. I believe they're, to us, rational fears, right? Because the world has shown us that. The world has taught us that we can rationalize these fears because that's just what we live in. And I could truthfully spend a few hours going into all of these fears and all the ways that God has proven to us and promised us that he has delivered us from them. I'm going to spare you all on that because you don't need to be stuck here for 3 hours while I talk. But what are our views on fear as a people? What do we view fear as? Everyone fears different things. Some people, it might be financial security, their health, loss of loved ones. Personally, I don't like spiders a whole lot. Pastor Justin doesn't like frogs. It's just where we're at. Some people fear for friends and loved ones who aren't saved. I see that a lot in the church. We fear for those who aren't saved. And at the same time, on the other end of that spectrum, we become fearful of being the pushy Christian. We let those fears get to us and stop us from bringing them to the Lord. I see that sometimes in the church, and it's difficult. It's difficult. So the thing about that is our fears stop us from being able to let the Spirit lead us in those situations. And this becomes a vicious cycle back and forth of fear creating more fear. Some of the fears on the list, I believe, are incredibly real to me, and I think all of them are real to a lot of people. One that spoke to me in a very interesting way was the fear of missing out, or as John called it, FOMO. I guess there's an acronym for it now. That's pretty cool. At first, when I looked into that fear and was doing some research, it seemed kind of childish to me. I'll admit that, with whatever humility I have to come into that, because I know that a lot of people do fear it. But I thought back to kind of my days on the playground, being left out in school, and it struck me that the effect of the fear of missing out could have on somebody as I researched it more. See, I believe we all know that God opens and closes doors in our lives, right? So what happens when we're so afraid of leaving what we're in now that we don't step into a door? See, part of that is God does open doors, but we have to have the faith to be able to walk through them. We have to have the willpower to step forward. What happens if you don't because you're afraid to leave what's right here behind you? We have to take those steps in faith. Someone who is fearful of missing out, they may miss incredible opportunities in their lives because of that fear. From another angle, someone who gives into this fear might spread themselves too thin. They don't want to miss out on anything. So they're always doing something, and eventually they're just miserable while they're doing it. I've experienced that. Just saying yes, going out to wherever I'm going to be going, when truthfully, I just need some rest, right? But I don't want to miss out on that. I want to go hang out with those friends. I don't want to miss out what I'm doing. And then eventually it gets to a point where while you're there, you're not having any fun. But you don't have the ability to say no because you don't want to miss out. And it's this vicious cycle that I'm talking about. Maybe for some people, it's a fear of uncertainty or the fear of change. I think those two are very hand in hand. Both of those are on the list. The fear of not knowing what lies ahead or wanting to stay in your comfort zone. Can you see that hindering you from being led by the Spirit? Not being willing to step out? I don't know if anyone in here remembers, and I'm not that old, but it was like when I was a kid, Casting Crowns, the band had a song called The Voice of Truth. That song, when I was a kid, was like, bam, that was my jam all day long. And the song talks about stepping out of your comfort zone and letting go of those fears and listening to the truths that God has given us. And it made me think a lot about Peter having to step out of the boat, stepping out of his comfort zone. And I know this is a super familiar story to all of us. We've heard it a billion times by a billion pastors, and now you've got a 23-year-old kid standing in front of you about to talk about it. Here we go. Peter had to step out onto the boat and walk with Jesus. That was him walking in faith. Let's look at Matthew 14, verse 29. Oh, just come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith, he said. Why did you doubt? I believe wholeheartedly that the reason he doubted was because of that fear. because the fear took over. He lost sight of his faith. And rather than his faith overcoming his fear, he started to doubt his own faith. I want to look at one more fear on that list. Like I said, I'm not going to go into all of them because that's a long time for us. But for me personally, one of my biggest fears in my entire life is the fear of inadequacy. I struggle with that a lot, with not being good enough or being afraid of not being good enough. Even writing out this sermon over and over again, I got caught up and I struggled with the idea of, this isn't going to be good enough for the people. I'm not going to reach anyone. I'm not going to be good enough. Oh my gosh, I'm just a 23-year-old kid, help. On a certain level for me, when I was asking myself, okay, where does this fear come from? Or where do all these fears come from? On a certain level, it was, for me being bullied as a kid. That created pretty intense insecurities that I still have to deal with on a daily basis. Through that, I became a slave to my fear. Even though God has promised that we set free, I became the slave. I allowed myself to do that. And it caused me to constantly strive to prove myself to people. A lot of you have known me for a while and you know where I was versus where I am now. But because of that, I always felt a need to please everyone. I still struggle with that one. And to appear better than I actually was. And this got to a point in that vicious cycle where I was lying about my failures. I was exaggerating my life so that way I could be better in people's eyes. So then that fear created sin. And then that created more fear and more sin. Eventually, I damaged a lot of relationships in my life. I lost a lot of friends. You can ask Matt about that one. Those relationships, because of how much I gave into that fear and because of how far I let the cycle continue without asking for help from God, they never recovered. I still have friends that I have a lot of regrets in my life over the way I lived, and that never recovering. I think that there are a lot of people in this room that have been through something similar to that, where you've given in and you've lost people because of it in that cycle. See, it's not that God has set us free from fear, right? But we allow ourselves to become slaves to that fear. The slave mentality of, this is what I know, and I'm going to go back to that because I'm afraid and I need to be back in my comfort zone. The enemy, I believe, really likes to take advantage of that, take advantage of the cycle and take advantage of our fears. And he wants to tell us that we're not good enough. I go back to that song, The Voice of Truth, where the waves are laughing at him. Or when David is standing in front of Goliath and he's laughing at him, telling him he's puny and small. But the truth is what God has already told us, right? See, the truth is what God has told us, that he set us free. We're no longer slaves to fear. We're no longer slaves to our sin. We have been freed from that yoke of slavery. So why do we keep going back? Why do we want to be so comfortable in something that's so negative? It dumbfounds me. See, I gave into my fears. I did. And the problems became bigger than they were, and bigger and bigger and bigger from there. Those fears created insecurity. They created more fear, more sin, and deeper I fell. My fears turned into that sin, and the cycle continued. So I asked myself, what's the solution here? Right? How do we change that? We've already come to the fact that we don't overcome our fears, that faith does. And I had to personally come into terms with this, that I am not good enough. I'm not. By the way, that sucks to say in front of a bunch of people, but I'm not good enough. I've had to accept that personally, and I had to understand that by Jesus' sacrifice, by his sacrifice and his grace alone, that he covers the areas where I'm weak. He's cast out my fears so that way I don't have to give in to them anymore. See, I don't have to return to the yoke of slavery to my fear. I choose to. You have to make a decision to allow God to lead you out of that. What I was just talking about, another familiar verse to us out of 1 John chapter 4, verse 18, says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and the one who fears is not perfected in love. God's perfect love casts out my fear. But when I give into those fears, I am punished by myself. It's not by God. God isn't the one punishing me. It's by me, because I'm going down that path, down the cycle. His perfect love casts my fears, and because of his love, because of his sacrifice, I've been set free from that slavery. But speaking practically, how do we as a people, how do we get our faith to overcome our fears, and how do we grow in our faith? It seems simple enough, but step one, I have a little 3-step thing here. We ask God for faith, right? In Luke chapter 17, the disciples asked Jesus directly for more faith. They did. See, our faith is actually a God-given gift. Having an understanding of that our faith is God-given. So it's so simple. It's just a simple prayer, God, give me more faith. Step 2, we recognize what that opening verse said in 2 Timothy, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. We recognize that fear is not from God and is not ours. We have to take control over our lives. We have to take control over that because God has given us the authority to. That fear is an attack, and we have to recognize that and declare, no, I want nothing to do with this, and send the enemy packing. Declare it to yourselves. Take the authority that God has granted you. Step 3, as simple as it might sound, it's doing something either every day or every week, start somewhere, that is outside of the norm for you and faith-filled. That is how you grow in your faith, right? Maybe it's spending more time in the Word. You know, our faith comes from the Word and it comes from God. So for you, it could be that. Maybe I'm going to open my Bible for 30 minutes a day more than I normally do. It could be as simple as giving 3% more in your offering and having the faith that God is going to bless you for that, right? I know it's a touchy subject for a 23-year-old. It could be getting more involved in your church, right? We have here personally, we have a lot of outreach ministries, and for a lot of us, time isn't the issue. You know, it's our fear of what can we give? What can I provide? You know, if you have the faith to step forward and say, you know what, I'm going to go down to that orphanage in Mexico, and I'm going to allow the Spirit to lead me and take a step out of my comfort zone and out of my fears so that way he can. Then from there, you're becoming more faith-filled, right? You're growing in your faith. If you take the time to go down to the Women's Center, you don't know how God is going to lead you, but for some of you, there might be a woman there who has a story that directly relates to your life. And you can help her to overcome those obstacles that she's going to face because you've done it. You never know, right? It could be going something as simple as going to Northtown. I don't know what I have to offer there, but all it is that some of those ladies out there, the only Jesus they see in their lives is on the first Saturday of every month. And you never know how the Spirit is going to lead you in those moments, how you're going to bless someone else's life. We have to have the ability to take steps out of our comfort zone and walk in faith. Let the Spirit lead us. Can I have the band come up? Short word today. I spoke a little too fast. I'm not done yet. Sorry. I have like 2 more minutes. Hold on. As I start to close up today, I want to give one last piece of insight in this. And I can have Chad and Joel play a little bit behind me too as we're coming up on this close. See, this process of overcoming our fears, I had to really think and great with this one, and Justin and I had to talk about it. This isn't a mind over matter situation. You know, this isn't about toughing it out. And I think thinking about that, a lot of the times that's how I get through my week, right? Everything is kind of piling in and you just shake it off, tough it out, and move forward, right? And truth be told, it's not about that. It's not about mind over matter. It's actually about being vulnerable enough, being open enough to ask God to come in and lead you, to ask the Spirit to give you that faith, to come in and lead you out of it. We can't do it ourselves. We have to be earnest in our desire for him to lead us. The reality is that God set us free from that slavery to fear, that he gave us the gift of faith. That is how we overcome our fears, is with that gift. If you all bow your heads this morning, if I could have some of our prayer team members come up, maybe JJ and Carolyn, Robert, Dan and Laura. God, we thank you for the gift of faith that you've given us. God, I thank you for that, the fact that you've set us free from that yoke of slavery to sin, to fear. God, I thank you for what you've done in our lives and what you will continue to do in our lives. God, I thank you for the growth that will happen within this church, Lord. I thank you for the steps of faith that people are going to take, God, and understanding that they're not trapped by this fear. I thank you for the blessings that you bring us and for your sacrifice and for your grace. God, I ask that you lead us this morning, that you direct our hearts into your worship, into your presence yet again. Lord, that if there is somebody in this congregation that is having trouble letting go of those fears, that you come invade their hearts this morning, God, in a new way. I ask that you lead them, God, in your spirit, that you help them to understand that they're not a slave to that fear anymore. You help them get out of that cycle. If there's someone this morning that's struggling with that cycle, ask God to invade your hearts. In the name of Jesus, I ask him to do that now. If you are stuck in that cycle, come forward and get out of it. I want to open the altars this morning and allow for anyone who's struggling with fear right now, who's struggling with that mentality of this is what I'm comfortable with and wants to take a step out, that you come forward. God, I just ask a blessing over this congregation and over what you're going to do. I thank you for your word and your truth and your light. In your name.